Thank you for joining us. And I just want to say to the group, I've seen Richard's radios and his work, and they're just beautiful. Craftsmanship and artistry, along with electronics. I'm really looking forward to this. Without further ado, let's kick it over to Richard.
Thank you. Let me get things going here. I started making this presentation a couple of years before COVID hit. And I kind of started, I presented it in a fashion at W6KYR in Santa Clarita, but I kept adding to it. Okay, originally somebody from W6SD suggested I make crystal sets and present it, and there would be some interest in it. So I thought I would try that. That's originally got me started doing this. So in order to get to the point where there's AM radio, which was coming in around 1904 or something like that, where they had AM broadcast stations. To get there, you had to, first you ended up with some other technical achievements had to come first. And I thought I'd give you a little information on how that worked. For example, 1844, Samuel Morse developed telegraphy and the Morse code. 1860, a German scientist invented a microphone. In 1866, a few years after Samuel Morse made telegraphy, they came up with the transatlantic telegraph cable so they could send communications across the Atlantic. And then 10 years after that, Graham Bell came up with his telephone. 1888, Heinrich Hertz proved the existence of radio waves. And then a few years after that, Marconi developed the first radio wave-based wireless telegraphy communication system. I think people had fooled around a little bit with this wireless telegraphy. They did this with spark gaps, and they did make a little bit of, but nobody really had a communication system. You know, like you go out to HRO and you buy yourself a transceiver, and now you can set that up and you can work stuff. Well, nobody had anything like that. And then shortly after Marconi did his wireless telegraphy, in 1919, they had a super heterodyne radio receiver. Of course, that was for AM radio. So what happened was, this is Marconi's radio set. He was living in his mother's house. He's 20 years of age. Doesn't this remind you of your first station? When you lived with your parents and you set up an antenna, you set up a goofball-looking station, you had a telegraph key. Of course, this had to run off a battery down here on the floor. So here's what happened. Late one night in December 1894, at the age of 20, Marconi demonstrated a radio transmitter and receiver to his mother. A setup that made a bell ring on the other side of the room by pushing a telegraph button on a bench. This is the kind of thing we would do, right? We would do funny little things like that when we were 20 years old, and we'd show our parents how great that was. So anyway, here it is. This thing on the wall here is foil. That's actually an antenna. So Marconi, after that, came up with a functional transmitter and receiver system that could work over long distance with many components. It was like in the early days of ham radio, you'd have a transmitter and receiver and a few other odds and ends, and that's how you kind of put it together. Well, Marconi had something like that. He had a oscillator or spark-producing transmitter. I think those are illegal now, because when you transmit on a band with a spark gap, you destroy the whole band. So I don't think tuning works so great, so I don't think they let you do that anymore. An antenna consisting of wire or metal sheet capacity area suspended above the ground. And the interesting part was, they hadn't, when Marconi was doing this, they didn't have diodes, they didn't have crystal radios, they didn't have much of anything. So how in the heck do they get a receiver to receive anything? Well, apparently what they had was something called, forgive me for mispronouncing this, a KYR receiver, which somebody had come up with. Marconi apparently increased its sensitivity and made it more reliable. So he made a working system. That's what he really did. He had a telegraph key to operate his transmitter, send short and long pulses. Of course, the telegraph key was developed years before that. For example, if you come back over here, the telegraph key was Morse in 1844. Okay, here's a picture of the KYR receiver, and this is really cool. Here's what happens. Here's your antenna. And here's a tuned circuit. You got to tune in your spark gap transmission. It goes into a tube, and apparently there's two little contacts in there that are separated by a short distance. And there's some metal, I think there's metallic particles in there. And what happens is, or some kind of conducting particles. And what happens is when this thing receives a spark gap transmission, the particles close the circuit in this tube because there's particles across there. So then he had a small battery. Here's the battery, which runs through the tube and operates this coil. This coil pulls up this thing, makes a connection, and there's this bigger circuit down here with a big battery. Now this battery runs like a tape machine. When this all closes, it writes on the tape machine, and then you got little dots and dashes come flowing out of this. The problem is when you get your first transmission, this thing keeps recording because what's to stop it? So what they did, very clever, they come up here at the same time they make the dot or dash on the paper. This battery is also hooked up to power these coils so that it pulls this down. This is like a little rubber ball, bangs on the tube, breaks the particles up so there's no more circuit going on. And so that way they could wait for the next dot or dash to come in to record that. So this is how they actually did things with a paper recorder. I thought this was sort of cool. It was amazing how they come up with these things. Of course, it didn't work very well. The sensitivity wasn't all that hot. But they liked the fact that you got a paper recording. They didn't need people to listen to dots and dashes like we do today. Okay, so what happened next? Here's a picture of Marconi's KYR receiver in 1896, what this thing looked like. It's kind of interesting in how polished. Look how the machining is and all this stuff and everything they did here. It's really kind of looks pretty cool. All right, now this is the fun part, I think. Marconi was starting to set up all over the place. You know, he was 20 years old. He got a few years older. He started setting up all over the place. In 1897, he was on Flatholm Island. That's off the coast of England. And he set up a station. He's got his pole with a wire antenna going off, just like we do at field day. And this is his station all set up to work. And I don't know how it worked exactly, but it must have been a spark gap. And then it probably had a KYR receiver in there. And so it's a nice portable little unit. Here you got the lookers on enjoying the field day representation that Marconi was putting on. And they said post office engineers. And so he was transmitting and talking to somebody else. Of course, whenever you put up an antenna, you always want to have a better one. So what he did was he set up in St. John's, Newfoundland, December 1901, and was able to make a contact across the Atlantic. Of course, that was a big deal. But the way he got his antenna up, you might want to keep this in mind for field day, he had a kite. So they got a kite, pulled up the wire, and then they were able to make contact across the Atlantic Ocean. On the other side, in Europe, there was a tall mast or tower to receive this thing. So this is pretty cool. Okay, so 1902, a transmission from the Marconi station in Glace Bay, Nova Scotia, Canada, became the world's first radio message to cross the Atlantic from North America. So that was 1902. 20 years later, we weren't using spark gaps so much. They were broadcasting AM radio. The first AM radio stations came up in about 1920. In 1921, there were 5 commercial AM radio stations. And after 1921, shortly thereafter that, by 1925, 4 years later, they had 571 stations across the United States, all AM broadcasts like we have today. The thing was that where you lived, there was probably only one AM station you could hear. So you didn't need a very complicated setup to separate the AM stations. You could just use, a crystal set. They didn't have vacuum tubes in those days. You had to have your own batteries. You had to have a big battery on the floor, and you had to plug it into your radio, and you would have to spend $235 in 1924. In today's dollars, that would be about $3,209. Or you could look in the magazines and people would advertise crystal radio sets that you could buy real cheaply. They didn't use batteries. You didn't have to fuss with that. You could even buy the parts and put it together yourself. The information was available everywhere. It must have been fun in those days if you wanted to build a crystal radio, because you probably could look in the Sears radio catalog and find some parts that you needed. So the expense of a tube radio was too much. Here's another example. Let's see. Okay, here's a picture of a RCA radio in 1924, $220. In those dollars, in 1924, there was one that looked just like this for $286. That's like $4,500 today. I mean, how many of you guys want to buy an L-Craft K4, cost too much, or an ICOM 7600 or whatever you want? I mean, it's a lot of money. You like a little cheaper radio, but America was using crystal sets for quite a while because they just couldn't afford these things. I guess rich people could. Fun-looking speaker, isn't it? So here's the thing. So if you're going to make your crystal set, what do you got to do? Here's the simple thing. Antenna, longer and higher the better. What I use at my house, I have a 67-foot end-fed antenna. That's up, maybe varies from about 20 feet to 15 feet above the swimming pool. And it's 67 feet long, and that's my antenna. You put it into a coil. Get some enamel wire, wrap maybe 60 turns or so on a 3 or 4 inch tube, and you got to have a ground, otherwise it's not going to work. And then here's a variable capacitor, a diode, and a set of phones. This is a picture I got from the crystalman.com, xtalman.com. If you want to buy this set or some other similar sets where you can, if they're little kits, you can put them together. Maybe stain the board and make it look pretty. You could do that. He's a good source for parts too. He has all sorts of unusual parts. I was going to, at Placerita Canyon, I was going to show how you can make a cheesy crystal set. I got a oatmeal container. Here it is. I took a penny and melted some solder on it and stuck a rock on it. Now the rock was a piece of iron pyrite. You can buy little chunks of these rocks. You can get a tiny little package and find maybe 30 of these things in there for a couple bucks, and that could be your diode. But you're going to have a very fine wire to touch the spot on it. And when you do that, and if you're lucky, and you got the coil all set up, and here's your little cheap variable capacitor. So I set this up at Placerita Nature Center on a bench, throwing a wire over some bushes. I found a water pipe, and I can hear a few stations. Okay, the best place to attach to the coil is not always the top. There might be other places along here. So what you do is you make things called taps, and you pick a bunch of things. This is a switch that picks it. So I made a crystal set. I had a variable capacitor here, another one there. So this would tune your antenna, this would tune your stations, and then you can pick off where it was strongest, and you could choose your diode. Now, it's nice to use a cat's whisker and a rock, but as soon as you bang into it, the wire moves. You can't hear anything anymore. So out of frustration, at the bottom of my radio, I put a little switch where I could flip in a 1N34A diode, which would work. You wouldn't have to fuss around. Then when you're demonstrating to somebody, you can flip the switch over and say, look, you just have a little cat switcher. You'd use some kind of creepy ceramic earphone like this. The ones that were made a few years ago were really lousy. Use them once, they'd fall apart. I think some of them are a little better right now, but they have a very high impedance, which was fine because that worked well with the high impedance of a crystal radio. This resistor is across here because sometimes these earphones, if they weren't leaking, they would act like a capacitor. They'd fill up with charge, and then all of a sudden you'd be listening to your radio and there wasn't anything to hear anymore. So this would kind of bleed off that effect. And so that's what the resistor was in there for. So here's my set. So that set right here is this set. There's your coil. I have a tube socket where this plugs into. This is antique type plastic, garolite, I think, where with taps are inside. This switch here selects the tap. So this switch is this. And These variable capacitors are tuned with two knobs, this one and this one. And this is really lousy because the tuning is so coarse. If you try to tune in a station, it's almost impossible. We do have this switch here switches in different diodes that are underneath the cigar box. This is a cigar box. And this is an actual antique, probably about 100 years old. They were selling these things. One of them was called Fillmore crystal detector. You could buy this. This is a photocopy of the front of the box. You can see what it looked like there. And you'd poke around, try to find a spot. Good luck. I did take the output of this and put it in a speaker so people could hear it. Otherwise, with just headphones, you're not going to hear much. Anyway, I found working with cigar boxes kind of cool, but components that you buy today don't fit that well because the box is very thick. So you might want to counterbore some of these holes because it's really, really difficult to get everything to work on this. Now, the next thing that was going on here is I wanted to improve on this thing. First of all, I was using a 4,000 ohm set of headphones, which worked pretty good, but I wanted to get better headphones. And the better headphones are either what you call balanced armature headsets that were made in those days, a different type of technology in the headphone. It worked really well. And then they came up with something called later on sound-powered headphones, which were extremely sensitive. So what did I do to the set? I got rid of, I kept that. Here's the taps. There's the variable capacitor. Here's your choice of rocks. This is a transformer. Basically, you could change the input impedance to match the set a little better. This would change, you could change the impedance to match the whatever headphone you happen to be using. Now, since this is hooked up to a coil, we really don't need the 47K resistor anymore. So this set worked pretty good. I was able to use better headphones, get rid of the ceramic ones, or I could dial in whatever impedance I need to match the headphone. And that makes a big, big difference. Then the next thing I did with this thing, I decided, you know what, I'd like to put a spider coil in here. A spider coil, I plugged it in here. This switch became useless, and I wanted to make things work a little better. So what I did was, this became a spider coil. I added some extra diodes. Not all the germanium diodes are the same. Some are better quality than others. And I found one, a D18, which I thought was super. Later, it is really good, but the one N34A, if you get an old one, don't buy one that's made today. Buy one that's made 50 years ago or 40 years ago. I mean, those are much better quality. I also use Litz wire on the spider coil. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. And I hear something called a Benny. Ben Tung found out that if you're getting a lot of distortion into your headphones, you could get rid of a lot of that by putting a resistor and variable. You could vary the resistance. You could blocking the DC current flowing through here, and then the AC would go across this capacitor. And that actually, what it did in the set I was using, it actually increased the volume of the set. It made it much stronger volume. Although I don't think that was originally the whole idea of the Benny. But let's see, here's the set. Now this set looks a lot like that set because it is that set. I just kept drilling new holes. So here's some more. There's your transformers, input, output. This little tiny knob for tuning was crummy, so I got a bigger one. One of the problems is even though these numbers are marked and all that's really clever, it's useless. It's just decorative. I never was able to use this for anything. This is the Benny. Here's a Benny movie. First, I'm going to run the radio the way it comes out to the detector. Then I'm going to insert the Benny circuit, and then I'm going to couple the trap. And you can watch all this happens, and hopefully you can hear what's going on. First, I'll turn on the switch. We didn't mention what a trap is. What I did was, here, let me show you a schematic, is if you take another variable capacitor and coil, and you feed your antenna input this way into this part of the circuit, And so this looks like it's not even hooked up or doing anything. It still works. It nulls out the signal. So we'll show you how that works. First, I'm going to run the radio the way it comes out to the detector. Then I'm going to insert the Benny circuit, and then I'm going to couple the trap. And you can watch all this happens, and hopefully you can hear what's going on. First, I'll turn on the switch for that. That's a diode. You're just turning on to a diode. There you can see how that sounds. Now I'm going to flip the Benny on. Now I'm going to rotate the trap around so that it works. It looks like Southwest Airlines will be canceling thousands of 737 MAX flights. It looks like you can see now that the interfering station is pretty much gone. So in this circuit here, I never actually made the circuit the way you see it, where your antenna picks either this one or this one. I have a coax SO239 where you either plug your coax in this side or you plug it in over there. So there's no switch. There's no reason to have a wire here. It doesn't do anything, but doesn't hurt anything either. So what happens is this spider coil broadcasts, it's about 10 inches away from this one. It broadcasts across the open space. This one picks it up. You tune it in, and here's your diode selector, here's the Benny, and there's your amplifier, and then here's your set of headphones, magnetic headphones. I was using crystal ones anymore at this point. Okay, here's a picture of that. You either feed your coax into a coaxial connector on this box, or you feed it into that box. And this is a set of headphones I bought. You can still buy these today. They're excellent headphones. I bought about 10 or 12 different headphones, all sorts of things, trying to find the ideal one. And for $29, this is as good as any. And it's a good deal. Okay, let's see what I got here. Oh, the trap. What I've done here is I've used my trap to block out a station. Right now you're hearing the station that's weak. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the trap, and you can see the difference it makes. This is a different station. Yeah, so what happened there was, even though that box I pulled away isn't physically connected to it, it does couple into it, and the best way to use something like that, the best way to use this arrangement here is to null out the station that's so loud you can't stand it. And then once you did that, you can use this thing to tune around. And as you're tuning around, you can tune right over that station that was really strong. You don't hear anything. And then when you go either side of it, you'll pick up other stations. If you have really high Q Litz wire coils, it's going to work pretty good. Okay, so here's something I called Superset 3. I don't know where I got these names anymore. Here's the set, 365 pico. Okay, here's your variable capacitors. Actually, this isn't true. I think I used 580 picofarads for both of these. And they're ganged together because I bought precision ones, but this variable capacitor right here is in case these two don't match up exactly, you can peek them out. Turned out with the capacitors I had, they were so good, this wasn't even necessary. So here's your spider coil. It's going to transmit across an open space over to here. This was the same idea as that one. This was not useful either. This was supposed to be an enhancement. Like instead of picking different spots on the coil by varying this thing, you could pick up your signal a little bit. This turned out, for me, it didn't work. I saw a lot of circuits where everybody claimed it worked, but it didn't work for me. This diode, this is weird. If you put this variable capacitor in here, there's a DC current flow through this thing, and if there's a variable capacitor in here, it blocks the DC current flow and to going around in here, and this you get no signal. So you put a diode in here, so there's a complete circuit, and this thing works. I tried it. I took this thing out, no signal, put it in, there it was. Or get rid of this thing altogether and you got a signal. So that's kind of how this thing goes. Here's a trap, a separate trap. I didn't do this right. I didn't make this trap the same quality as these other spider coils. So the net effect was it didn't null things out as well as it could have. So there's the set. A little nicer, huh? This got to be a little bit of an issue. I've got sometimes a Garolite, or I'm trying to remember the plastic. I got it from McMaster Car. I had a friend curve the corners for me. I got these things made up on the internet. I bought this off of a guy who was selling these in England. The dials. I found an antique vernier dial. These are all reduction drives, so they're much better tuning. You can tune things in great. This particular thing was to match up. If the two variable capacitors in here didn't match up exactly, you could peak them up. It turned out to be a waste of time. Here's a description of the set. This is Superset 3. It's in two parts. The left part, the signal is fed in from the back. So it's fed in back here. That's both the antenna and ground. Here's your two tuning capacitors, and this one adjusts them so that they're exactly the same. The signal gets broadcast from this spider coil over to this spider coil. And down here you have, here's an audio transformer, matches the impedance in and out for the signals. And down here, this is the trap adjustment. And to get that to work, you have to raise this up to some angle, and the higher up it is, the more it can null out a signal. I have fed a speaker input right here, or you could have headphones here. So in the next little video, I'm going to show you how it sounds. Yeah, a real crystal set wouldn't have speakers, but if you want to hear anything, that's what I got to do. Okay, here's an American station from Simi Valley. We'll dial in this thing a little different. So you can see, this thing does pick up stations. It's very tricky though. Yeah, it's tricky because you have to adjust this knob, that knob. You may want to use the trap, and then you have to adjust the spacing. By what you do with this set is you slide this thing over to the left so that you can adjust the spacing, because you have to find the right spacing to make the for each station at different frequencies will be loudest based on the spacing. This set worked great. I picked up over 60 stations, AM radio stations across the country. The furthest one I got was Denver and one in Seattle. And I could pick up stations in New Mexico and all over the place. And if I wanted to do better, I'd have to have better coils. I could talk to you about that if you're interested later. But anyway, this thing worked great. It was a great set. You see, I did separate them here, but that separation distance, you got to change it for the various frequencies you're trying to tune in. Okay, so now I decided to make Superset 4. The first thing I decided I wanted to do with this thing, I'll show you what it was all about, and then I'll go back and look at it. Okay, I made a gearing arrangement so I could take this knob, which is calibrated. It's got a 120-degree dial that I came up with, and you can turn this around so that this coil over here will go all the way from over here to over there. And then you can adjust the spacing between the coils. You don't have to slide the sets around to kind of optimize them that way. So let's see what else I did here. Here's your variable capacitors. These are actually 580 picofarads. I'm sorry I got cut off. Here's another, on the other side, on the tank side, here's your 580. This side they refer to as the tuner. 3 diodes are fine, but you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The more diodes, the merrier. So I had all these different diodes, and it does make a difference. They're all germanium diodes, but you find that some diodes are much more sensitive than others, and it does make a difference. Okay, all the features, I put a meter in here. There's the meter. I got that from Russia, 10 microampere meter, or this was 20, I think. And I got these antique verniers. The thing with these antiques, they didn't make things so great 100 years ago. So if you really want to have a set that performs better, in some ways you might be better off with a modern vernier dial. Not as pretty looking, but probably much more effective. Okay, let's go back. Oh, there we go. Okay, over here on the right side, here's a headphone, and I got a 10,000 ohm attenuator. The sound-powered headphones that I use are about somewhere between 300 and 500 ohms, which you can then pick off whatever sounds the best. And so if you add 10,000 ohms in there, that's going to reduce the volume. Some of these signals come in, they're really loud, they were ear-piercing, so you had to really watch it. You didn't want to blow your brains out, so you have to do something to turn the volume control. Now, this is an interesting one. This is actually an op amp. And I read an article by somebody called Ben Tung, the same one named after the Benny. And in one of his circuits, he added an op amp feature in there. So I stole the circuit out of there and put it in mine. And but the interesting part was the way this thing was not powered by a battery, it was powered by a supercapacitor. So what would happen is I used to tune in 710 on the AM dial, and a few years ago that AM station had an absolutely amazing signal where I live. It was just completely, you'd get hearing damage if you actually tried to use that. You could run a speaker right off of it. It was so loud. And that would charge my supercapacitor up in about 7-8 hours, and then that would run my op amp for a day or two straight. It worked really well. The only thing that went wrong was I kept charging this up, and it would hold the charge. The supercapacitor would hold the charge for months and months and months and months, and then one day I noticed when I thought I may want to charge it up again, the station had lowered their power. So I didn't have an AM station out here in Santa Clarita that was strong enough for me in my location to use the RF out of that to charge up my supercapacitor. Now the way this set works, there's three switches that are ganged together here, here, and here. And basically what they do is that you can turn off this amp and it just becomes a regular crystal set, bypasses the whole thing. Or you can tune it back in and then you got your amp. The amp would have about 20 dB gain. It made a heck of a difference. But it wasn't necessary for all the local stations. And here's this switch here is to turn the meter on and off and bypass that if that was what you want. So let's see what we got here. So in order to get this stuff, I laid this all off in AutoCAD for the placement of the parts. I laid it out to scale, and I put a piece of paper on the plastic form that I had, and I knew where to drill my holes to get everything to line up perfectly, because I got everything lined up on AutoCAD. It took me a while to do that. I designed the board on AutoCAD where the parts were placed, and the whole thing was a lot of work. Okay, here's a picture of the set from the top, looking down into it. Once again, I've got these 580 picofarad variable capacitors. Here's a pair of headphones I made. If you look at this little thing right here, that's an element that came out of a set of French military telephone-like things. And these telephones, I don't know if I have a picture of that yet. Let's see. Do I? No, maybe I don't. Yeah, these telephones, you could connect 2 miles of wire between one telephone and the next telephone. No batteries, no power, and you could talk to somebody. That's how sensitive these sound-powered headphones are. They're outrageous. And this, of course, improves what you can hear in a crystal set if something is that sensitive. And that was really great. So let's see what I got here. Here's a picture of the front of the set. You got diode selector, volume control, which is really an attenuator, your tank circuit impedance, the headphone impedance. You dial in. I had to get this plate designed and made by somebody else because the person I bought from originally quit selling these things. I had this thing built for me according to I drew that up on AutoCAD. This is a switch to switch on and off the amplifier. And this is kind of what you got here. Here's this a microamp meter I got from Russia. I don't think I'm getting any of those anymore. I do have an extra one, by the way. Okay, let's see what I got here. Here is Superset 4, which is the next radio I came off with. Since the spider coils in the back have to move back and forth to get the ideal spacing, I made this control right here. And you can see, if you look in the back, you can see the spider coils moving as I do that. So these coils are on a track. This gears are set up so that this thing, when you go from here to here, takes the spider coil and moves the second one on the right all the way over. We've added some features. We have a meter. There's a meter right here to measure the microamperes. Your bennies right here. This turns on the audio amplifier, which is an addition to the set. This audio amplifier was constructed right there. And if you look really carefully over here, you can see a little black thing. It's about a 1/8 of an inch square, has 6 little feet on it. That's the integrated circuit chip. I got the circuitry for this from Ben Tung, who wrote some fantastic articles. And this particular amplifier can be used to amplify the signal on the crystal set, or you can turn it off with that switch. Here's audio impedance matching between the input and output, and here's your feed in. This whole thing was drawn with AutoCAD. I drew a template for the whole face, and that laid out all the holes exactly, so I could, and I drilled them all with a hand drill, but I took like a 1/16 of an inch drill bit, and the center marks were placed on this thing with the template. So this was a bit of work. Anyway, I'll give you a demo of this thing in just a minute. Okay, this is Superset 4, and I'm going to give you a demo of how this sounds. I'm going to plug in a speaker because this is made for headphones, but it'll work with speakers.
Tickets to 3 Super Bowls in a row. Well, Verizon's got you. Verizon's giving away 20 pairs of tickets to 3 Super Bowls in a row. To enter for your chance to win, go to your local Verizon store.
Accident attorneys know all too well what injured victims go through. Your injury can keep you from everyday activities, including work, not to mention having to live with the pain. That's why the attorneys at Sweet James have devoted their lives to helping injured clients. They're going to help you get the medical treatment you need so then you can heal. And they'll help you get the money you deserve so you can financially recover. And they're going to treat you with compassion along the way. That's right. Sweet James has one mission. Again, the coaching staff, the Skylar Thompson, the running game, the offensive line, the defense. I think everybody's played over their heads so far today. Still may not be enough. I still would say Buffalo and Josh Allen will put it away here, but just...
If these aren't both tuned in exactly, you can't hear anything. So you could sit there and use this thing, say this thing doesn't even work.
Man, it's made a difference. Man, I feel like I'm in my 20s again. At work, in the gym, and in the bedroom. Are they still giving out complimentary bottles for people to try for themselves? Yeah, you just need to send them a text. Text break to 3.
Okay, I gave you a small demo how that works. And we're gonna, I'll find a weak station and show you the amplifier. It's not too weak, but here's the amplifier.
Products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease or illness.
That's how that works. Yeah, the amplifier, it makes a difference. Well, here's a spider form. I had to draw these up on AutoCAD. I dimensioned them, I drew them up to scale, and I had the forms sent to a place that did the laser cutting of these forms. Let's see, headphones. An important part is the headphones. I use something called sound-powered headphones. I bought 2 of these, and if you unscrew the top piece, there's an element that'll pop loose. I put those elements right inside right here. Stuff some cotton to kind of hold it in place. Now the sound powered elements are so good that a telephone looking thing like this with 2 miles of wire between two headphones with no power, you can talk to somebody. That's how sensitive these things are. They're outrageously good. You can use both the element in here, because this just unscrews, or you can use this one also. And so these elements are called sound powered. They don't use batteries or anything. They simply use the power of the sound to run the elements, and they have an interesting design. The design came out originally around 1924, and got improved quite a bit when they made these headphones. So the question is, how simple a set could we make that would still work? How's this one? I got my antenna, I got my ground, I got a couple things here. I got my solder, a rock on top of it. I've got these are sound powered headphones also. And you just connect all these things up, no coil, no variable capacitor, and you can hear stuff. You may hear them all at once, but you'll hear it. Not loud, but you'll hear it. Okay, this is what I really wanted to make. Unfortunately, this is a lot of artistry in this. There's a guy in England who manufactured this, and I think he sold this particular radio, AM crystal radio, to some guy in Saudi Arabia for thousands and thousands of dollars. I have no idea how much. He used to sell these dials. He used to sell the knobs. I wish I'd bought a whole bunch of the things he sold, because they were really nice. Okay, I was gonna give you, this doesn't work because I've got videos and articles and stuff like that. I was gonna show you all about that. I'll skip all that. If you want to buy stuff, I have a whole bunch of places you can buy things from. So let me show you a couple things. I set up some links. I wanted to show you what's available. Okay, here's a great website to get started on this stuff. He shows you what's going on, tells you about things in a simple way, gives you a bunch of examples of things you can do, and then he gives you a bunch of links at the end. A lot of these links go out of business. You can look him up. His call letters are VE7SL. He has a really nice web page, and one of the things is all about crystal radios, VE7SL. If you're really serious and you want to learn about everything, there's something called Dave's Homemade Radios. His website went out about a year ago, but there's something called the Wayback Machine, and they've recorded his entire, he has 78 crystal radios. Each one of these radios has a description describing how it works. It's got schematics, it's got helpful hints on how to put together, it's got all sorts of stuff, and he's got 78 of these things, and all different kinds of circuits. Very interesting. You might want to do this one. I think you might find that useful if you want if you want to get some help. Okay. Another one is, I was going to tell you that this is the cat's meow. This book I bought for $12.95 in paperback edition from the publisher. Of course, the publisher is now out of business, and you can buy them for $50, which is too much. You can get them on $10 for Kindle. Tells you about all sorts of stuff about crystal sets. This book is for somebody who doesn't know anything about electronics, doesn't know what a radio is, hasn't got a clue what an antenna is. He teaches about the parts, what kind of antennas to use, what kind of grounds to use. He tells you how to set up, how to make things, and then he shows you 3 or 4 circuits and describes in detail how to put these sets together. So this probably isn't for most of you, but if you're not into electronics, you might think this is pretty good. It's on Kindle if you want to get it. If there's something called the Crystal Set Society. They have tons of books. They're still. This is off Amazon. They're still sold at reasonable prices. You can get them from Amazon. You might want to look through. There's dozens and dozens of books they have, and they publish it. This is Ben Tung's website. He died a year ago. His website went down, and if you try to go to his website, you can't. But he's on the Wayback Machine. Everything that was on his website is right here. For example, how to make the op amp that I got is described here. There's the op amp that I stole out of another crystal set he had here, very complicated. But he's got some. This is for This says if you're an electronics engineer and you know what you're doing and you think the other stuff's too trivial, this stuff is not trivial. He's an electronics engineer himself. He had his own electronics company, and he did some original work on crystal sets that kind of extend the state of the art, if you would. And there's a lot to read here, and it's a good article. Now, if you decided, okay, I want to build a crystal radio, where do you get the stuff? Okay, after everything I've done, you can buy Litzwire. What Litzwire is, I use 660-46. I don't see it. 46 is the gauge of the wire. 1162 means there's 1062 separate wires in each one of these. These look like wires, these pink things, but they're actually separate wires with thousands of tiny wires in there, each enamel covered. When I first got that, I was thinking, well, how do I strip the enamel off each one of these 660 wires? They're so fine you can barely see them. It turns out it's not hard. You just put the end of the Litz wire on a soldering iron, and this goop all comes flowing off of it. That was the insulation for the enamel, and then you can solder it right there. So these are a great place to buy Litz wire. This is a wonderful transformer. That's what I use in my sets. Here's the headphones, the balanced arm, $29. I bought 10 or 12 headphones. I spent, it's embarrassing how much I spent. You can get something better than anything else I found by getting this. What I did, I took a screwdriver, removed the microphone. I didn't put on the rubber cups. The wires that come out of here, I actually replaced my wires because sometimes it was intermittent. There's a connection in the center where the two wires come off. They're not soldered. They're kind of pressed, and so sometimes it doesn't work right. But I just replaced them, and then you'll have a fabulous set of headphones. Oh, there it is. 660-46 looks like that. Here's you can go to Mike's Electronic Parts. You can buy cheesy variable capacitors that look like this. Don't work that great, but they work a little bit. You can get Litz wire from him, different colors, and the other place only has one color. You can get these really cheap $10 crystals radios that barely work. Here's ones that look a little bit nicer for $49 and $20 or stuff. You can buy all the little part. If you want to build something a little nicer and you don't want to go out and you just want something, just send it to me. You can go to thecrystalman.com, and this would be a nice little set right here. He sends you everything but the headphones and the antenna and ground. And he's got a little diode across here. His thing is Borden Radio Company. And he's an 80-year-old guy. If you want to build this thing, you better go out there and buy it right away. Facebook pages, there's two of them. There's a DX one and the regular Crystal Radio group has like 9,000 people in it. I bought my earmuffs from, this is live, so they're still selling it for $379. You can buy these this thing here. What I did is I heated up this edge here. It was a little too stiff in my head, so I warmed it up and spread it apart a little bit without wrecking it. And I use this to make my headphones out of. The sound-powered phones I used for the Elements. You can buy this on eBay. This is live, so it's still there. You can buy this you get two of them. These headphones are fantastic, but they're not quite as good in audio quality as there's a little better. They get better audio, but not quite as sensitive as the one I just built. Okay, and then if you want the 580 or 570 picofarad capacitors like this, you can buy these from this guy, and he still sells these things. These are gold-plated precision Philips variable capacitors. They're real good ones. And try and find something like this somewhere else today. Good luck. If there's any questions, I'll be glad to talk to you.